Your support keeps these stories alive. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell.
I'll be 28 this year, and my dad is turning 60. Those numbers seem heavy, almost symbolic, because they carry echoes of the past. My grandfather, my dad's father, never reached 70. He died at 63, taken by cancer in the year 2000. I was just 4 years old. Too young to truly know him, too young to ask him the questions I wish I could ask now. My memories of him are faint, almost like watercolor images that have been smudged with time, but they exist. There are pictures, faded photographs of me in his arms, laughing together. My hair sticking up at strange angles, his smile so wide it looked like nothing in the world could hurt him, even though, in truth, he was already sick. I wish I could tell you more about him from my own memory, but most of what I know comes from my dad. He paints the picture for me. A man born in 1937, raised in a country that was rebuilding itself after war. Someone who grew up with responsibility pressed into him early. He wasn't just kind, though that's how most people describe him. He was also disciplined, sharp, capable. He served in the Navy during the Cold War, working as an engineer on submarines. Imagine that submarines gliding silently beneath oceans, the tension of nuclear standoffs looming above, and my grandfather down there, making sure the engines stayed alive. That was his role, the man who kept things running. Maybe that's why my father inherited the same sense of duty someone who holds the weight for everyone else when things start to crumble. My grandfather married my grandmother in 1962, a Catholic ceremony that carried with it all the promise of a future. My dad was born the next year, then my uncle in 1966, then my aunt in 1970. By all accounts, my dad and his father were close. I think part of that bond came from circumstance. My grandmother, an atheist with a stubborn streak, didn't exactly mesh with a Catholic husband. The differences sharpened over time until, in 1975, she left the family. The divorce wasn't finalized until 1979, but by then the damage had already been done. My grandfather was left with 3 children, still young, still needing a parent. This is where my dad's story twists. He was only 12 when his mother walked away, but in that moment he stepped into a role no 12-year-old should have to take. He became the caretaker. He helped raise his younger brother, kept the household together, and filled the void his mother had left. My dad has told me stories of making meals when he was barely tall enough to see over the kitchen counter, of walking his brother to school, of feeling like the weight of the house rested squarely on his skinny shoulders. He grew up in survival mode, forced into responsibility far too soon, and yet he never resented his father for it. If anything, he admired him more for how hard he worked to keep their lives afloat. The house itself, the one they all lived in, is practically a character in this story. It was a modest, one-story home in the Bay Area of California. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, nothing extravagant. But it was theirs. My grandfather worked hard to pay it off, and by the time of his death, it was fully owned. Today, houses like that, in the same neighborhood, sell for nearly $1 million. Back then, it was just home, a place where my dad and his siblings fought, laughed, grew up, and learned the resilience that comes from struggle. For me, that house is layered with memory, even though I was so young. The sound of screen doors creaking, the way sunlight pooled across the living room carpet, the faint smell of old wood and lemon-scented cleaner. It was where I first knew family. In 1980, my grandfather remarried. His second wife, the woman who would become the grandmother I knew best, entered the picture. She, too, had children from her first marriage, 3 daughters around my dad's age. Blended families are never simple, but they managed. And from what I saw, there was love there, genuine love. My grandfather and his new wife adored each other. My dad, a teenager at the time, could have rejected her, could have resented her for stepping into his life, but he didn't. He accepted her. He treated her as though she were his own mother, and in turn, she treated him as a son. By the time I was born, she was simply Grandma. That was it. There was no distinction between her and my biological grandmothers. She made me blankets by hand, colorful and warm, stitched with patience. She cooked for me. She listened when I babbled on about things that mattered only to a child. She made me feel loved. For much of my early childhood, I saw her more often than my other grandmothers. In my heart, she wasn't step anything. She was family. But then, in 2000, everything shifted. My grandfather died, cancer, cutting his life short at 63. I didn't understand the finality of it at the time. To me, he was just gone one day, and the adults around me wore grief like a heavy coat. His estate, naturally, went to his wife, my step-grandmother. That was the law, and it seemed fair. She was his partner, the woman he had built a life with for 2 decades. For the next 18 years, she lived comfortably. She never worked after he died, never went on government assistance. She simply lived off what my grandfather had left behind. She stayed in that fully paid-off house, the same house where my dad had grown up, the same house where I had played as a child. And throughout those years, my dad treated her as though she were his real mother. He never once made her feel like an outsider. He showed her respect, kindness, loyalty, and I never doubted her love for us in return. But life has a cruel way of unraveling when you least expect it. In early 2018, she died. We didn't know she was sick. She never told us. Only her eldest daughter knew she had cancer. The rest of us were blindsided. One day she was there, crocheting, smiling her familiar smile, and then suddenly she was gone. I remember feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. She was nearly 80, but she had always seemed unchanged, timeless, the same as I remembered her when I was 5. Her death gutted us. And then came the will. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about family shattered. Because in her will, she made it very clear. My dad, his siblings, and any of their children were to receive nothing. Not the house, not the money, not even a keepsake. Everything went to her daughters. The estate my grandfather had worked his entire life to build the house he had paid off, the savings that had allowed her to live comfortably for nearly 2 decades, was handed to women who, as far as I knew, had barely lived in that house at all. One of them had been there for only 2 years before leaving for college. My dad's stepsister, the executor of the will, refused to even discuss it. When my dad asked, she lashed out at him, accused him of being insensitive, of pressing her in her grief, and then she shut him out entirely. That was 5 years ago. The silence has never been broken. We never got a penny. We never got an explanation. We never even got a chance to ask my grandmother why she had chosen to cut us out so completely. She took the answers with her to the grave. And so, my grandfather's legacy, his house, his savings, the physical evidence of all his hard work, vanished from us forever. What remains is the betrayal, the sting of knowing that the woman I had loved as my grandmother, the woman my father had cared for as a mother, had, in the end, decided we were worth nothing. And what cuts deepest is the fact that she's gone now, beyond questioning, beyond forgiveness, leaving us with nothing but grief and confusion. I've always tried to see the best in people. I've always tried to believe in love, in loyalty, in family. But how do you keep that belief alive when the people who betray you are the ones you loved most? That's the question that has haunted me ever since. That house in the Bay Area is more than just wood and drywall in my memory. It's almost like a family member itself. Every time I think about what happened, it's the house I come back to first. The creak of the hallway floorboards, the way the light would pour through the front windows in the late afternoon, the lemon tree in the backyard that seemed older than time itself. Even though my memories are blurry because I was so young, they're tied to feelings so strong that I can't forget them. It was where I sat on the carpet, with toys scattered around me, where I watched my dad and my grandfather together, where the photographs of us laughing were taken. When my dad talks about his childhood, the house always takes center stage. He told me about the long nights he spent doing homework at the kitchen table while trying to keep his younger brother entertained. About mornings where he cooked breakfast before school because there was no one else to do it. About the sound of his father's footsteps coming home from work, tired but steady, and the relief that filled the house when my grandfather was there again. That house represented more than shelter. It was survival. It was stability in the middle of chaos after his mother left. It was proof that even when life fell apart, my grandfather held the ground beneath his children's feet. And my dad carried that memory with him into adulthood. When my grandfather remarried in 1980, my dad was still a teenager living in that house. He could have rejected his stepmother, but instead he accepted her and made that house hers too. Over time, it became a blended family home. His siblings, his stepsisters, and eventually me and my younger brother visiting as grandchildren. For me, the house became a place of small but vivid experiences. I remember being handed a plastic cup of apple juice in the kitchen, the sweet smell of cookies baking in the oven, the crocheted blankets draped across the couch. I can still picture myself dragging a toy truck across the living room carpet while my step-grandmother laughed softly in the background. Even now, those sensory memories are so alive in me that I can almost smell the lemon zest from the tree outside, feel the roughness of the porch railing under my palms. So when I think about the fact that my dad, his own son, never inherited that home, it burns. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in the Bay Area is worth almost $1 million today, but to us, it was worth more than money. It was family history. It was the last physical piece of my grandfather, and now it belongs to someone who only lived there for a blink before leaving for college. Someone who never had to shoulder the burden of growing up inside those walls. Someone who, to this day, refuses to even acknowledge what that house meant to us. The injustice isn't just financial. It's emotional. My dad grew up in that house. He raised his brother in that house. He spent his teenage years making sure the dishes were washed and the lights stayed on in that house. And yet, when his stepmother passed away, the keys didn't land in his hands. They went to people who will never understand the sacrifices he made under that roof. I can't help but think about all the what-ifs. What if my grandfather had written his will differently? What if he had left even part of the estate directly to his biological children, knowing the house carried his legacy? What if my step-grandmother had divided things more fairly, honoring the love my dad gave her? What if she had left even a single memento to my dad? A gesture to say, I saw you, I loved you, I knew you were my son too. But there are no answers. Just an empty house in someone else's name, while my dad drives past million-dollar listings, knowing the place that should have been his is out of reach forever. The strangest part is how the betrayal rewrites the memories. For years, my dad kept one of my step-grandmother's crocheted blankets on his bed. It was comfort. It was connection. But after her will cut us out completely, he couldn't look at it the same way. He donated it. And with it, he gave away decades of affection that had suddenly soured. Now, whenever I think about that house, it's not just filled with memories of laughter or family dinners. It's filled with ghosts, ghosts of everything we lost, of every conversation we'll never have, of every answer we'll never get. And maybe that's the cruelest part. The house wasn't just a building. It was proof of who we were, of what my grandfather built, of what my dad endured. Losing it meant losing more than property. It meant losing a piece of our story. And stories, once stolen, can't be replaced. When I think about my dad, one word always comes to mind: loyalty. Not the loud, boastful kind, but a quiet loyalty that runs so deep it almost feels invisible until you realize just how much weight it carries. My dad was only 12 when his mother left, but instead of crumbling, he stepped into her place. At an age when most kids are worried about baseball cards or Saturday morning cartoons, he was cooking meals, folding laundry, and making sure his younger brother didn't fall apart. He never talks about those years with resentment, but I can see it in his eyes when he remembers. He didn't get to be a child. He was forced into being a parent long before he was ready. His father worked long hours, and though my grandfather did everything he could, there were only so many hours in a day, so my dad filled in the gaps. He was the glue that held everything together. And then, when his father remarried, my dad didn't rebel the way many teenagers would have. He didn't see his stepmother as an intruder. Instead, he embraced her. He treated her as if she had always been there. He welcomed her daughters as though they were his sisters, even though they were more like strangers at first. That's who my dad is. He doesn't build walls, he builds bridges. I saw that same loyalty in how he treated her after my grandfather died. He could have distanced himself, could have drawn a line and said, "You're not really my mother." But he didn't. He showed up for her. He respected her. He loved her. For 18 years, she was not his stepmother, she was his mom. I never once heard him call her anything else. As a child, I didn't realize the depth of that loyalty. To me, it just felt normal. She was Grandma. She gave me hugs. She slipped me cookies. She made blankets for my bed. My dad encouraged that bond, never once reminding me that we weren't related by blood. He didn't want me to feel any less loved, and so I didn't. But then came 2018, and with it, the unraveling of everything. When she died and her will was read, it wasn't just numbers on paper or property being transferred. It was a judgment, a declaration that my dad, after decades of loyalty and love, wasn't truly her son, that I wasn't truly her grandchild, that everything we had shared was somehow counterfeit in her eyes. I remember the night my dad told me. His voice wasn't angry, it was hollow. "She left us nothing," he said quietly. "Not a thing." He didn't raise his voice, didn't curse, didn't break down. He just sat there, looking like someone had carved the core out of him and left the shell behind. I don't think I'll ever forget that look. My dad isn't the type to show vulnerability often, but that night I saw it plain as day. It wasn't about the money or even the house, though those things mattered. It was about the betrayal, about realizing that the woman he had called Mom for most of his life had erased him with a single decision. For weeks afterward, he moved like a ghost through the house. He donated the blankets she'd made, the same ones he had slept under for decades. I asked him why, and he just shook his head. "I can't look at them anymore," he said. Those blankets weren't soft anymore. They weren't comfort. They were betrayal woven into yarn. And yet, here's the thing. Even with all that pain, he never once spoke a cruel word about her. He never called her names, never spat venom, never wished her ill. His hurt ran deeper than anger could ever reach. It was grief, pure and unfiltered. The grief of losing not just a person, but the meaning behind a relationship. Sometimes I wonder how he carried that pain without letting it harden him. Because if it were me, maybe I would have let bitterness take root. Maybe I would have closed myself off, refused to trust again. But not my dad. He still believes in showing up, in loving without condition, in doing the right thing even when it isn't returned. And that's what makes the betrayal so much sharper. Because it wasn't just that he was cut out of a will. It was that his entire life had been proof of his loyalty, and it was dismissed like it had never existed. When I think about my dad's quiet sacrifice, I realize something else, too. Maybe the real inheritance wasn't the house or the money. Maybe it was the example he set. The lesson that love doesn't always come with guarantees, that loyalty sometimes costs more than it gives, and that being a good man means doing the right thing even when it breaks you. Still, I can't help but ache for him, because he deserved so much better than the hand he was dealt. He deserved recognition, gratitude, and fairness. And instead, he got silence. Silence where there should have been love. What I didn't expect, what I still can't fully wrap my head around, even now, is the silence. When my dad first reached out to his stepsister, the executor of the will, it wasn't with anger. He wasn't demanding money or threatening legal action. He just wanted to understand. He wanted to hear her say something that would make sense of it all. After all, this was a woman he had known for decades. She had given us gifts, smiled at us during holidays, hugged me when I was a child. She had been part of the story of our family. Surely, she would explain. But instead, she snapped at him, She raised her voice, accused him of being cruel for even asking, said her grief was too heavy to talk about any of it, and then she shut the door figuratively and literally. That was 5 years ago, and she has not opened it since. Do you know what silence does? At first it feels temporary, like an awkward pause in a conversation that will eventually resume. You wait, thinking, maybe tomorrow she'll call back. Maybe next week we'll hear from her. Maybe she just needs time. But weeks turn into months, and months into years, and the silence stops being an absence. It becomes an answer that screams louder than any words ever could. You don't matter. You were never family. You don't deserve to know why. I've replayed those years over and over in my mind, looking for clues. Did she ever see us as outsiders, even when she pretended not to? Was her kindness just politeness? Something she offered on the surface while keeping us at arm's length in her heart? Or did something shift after her mother died? Some invisible line where blood suddenly mattered more than loyalty, more than love? I'll never know, because she refuses to speak. That's the cruelty of it. If she had at least explained, if she had looked my dad in the eye and said, "This is what my mother wanted, and I'm honoring her wish," it would still have hurt, but it wouldn't have left us in this limbo of not knowing. It's the silence that gnaws at you, because your imagination fills the gap, and imagination is often worse than the truth. Sometimes I think about all the little moments she shared with us before this rift, the handmade blankets, the hugs, the smiles, the words that seemed genuine at the time. Were they lies? Or did she mean them then, and later convince herself they didn't matter? I don't know which is worse, the idea that she was pretending all along, or the idea that she truly loved us and still chose to cut us off when it counted most. My dad doesn't bring it up often, but I know it eats at him. Every now and then he'll get quiet, lost in thought, and I can see the weight on his shoulders. I know he wonders the same thing I do. Why? Why did the woman he called Mom erase him? Why did his stepsister choose silence over compassion? Why does loyalty so often feel like a one-way street? What haunts me most is that I'll never get the answers. My step-grandmother is gone, buried with her secrets. My stepsister hides behind her silence. And the house, our house, is now lived in by strangers who will never know the footsteps that echoed down its hallway, the sacrifices that were made within its walls, the laughter and tears that shaped its history. I've always been the kind of person who wants to see the best in people. I want to believe that underneath it all, there's goodness, that people act with love, even if clumsily. But this silence has tested that belief. Because how do you see the best in someone who won't even look you in the eye? How do you hold on to faith in family when family turns their back without a word? It changes you. It reshapes the way you think about trust. It makes you cautious where you used to be open, skeptical where you used to be hopeful. I still want to believe in people, but there's always that whisper in the back of my mind now. Remember what happened. Remember how easily love can be rewritten. Remember how silence can be louder than truth. And maybe that's the worst inheritance of all, not the loss of money or property, but the loss of certainty. The loss of that simple, childlike faith that family means forever. Now, every time I think of her, every time I think of my stepsister, every time I think of that house, what echoes loudest isn't words. It's silence. Now that years have passed, I sometimes ask myself, what do we really have left? Not the house, not the money, not even a single keepsake. Everything my grandfather built, everything he wanted to pass on, is gone, absorbed into the lives of people who won't even speak to us. The estate was stripped from us. The silence continues, and the chance for answers died with the woman I once called Grandma. And yet, here I am, still breathing, still remembering, still carrying pieces of my grandfather in ways no will can erase. The truth is, inheritance is about more than property, more than bank accounts or deeds to houses. Those things matter. Yes, they can change lives in tangible, undeniable ways, but they aren't the only legacy someone leaves behind. My grandfather left my dad with resilience. He left him with the strength to raise his siblings, when no one else would. He left him with the determination to survive abandonment, to build loyalty even when life gave him every reason to withdraw. And my dad, in turn, has passed those same lessons on to me. I think about it sometimes, how my dad has every reason to be bitter, every reason to turn cold, but he hasn't. Even after being erased by someone he loved as a mother, even after being denied the house he grew up in, he hasn't let it harden him. He still shows up. He still loves fiercely. He still gives without keeping score. And maybe that's the true inheritance. Not a house worth nearly $1 million, not a bank account that vanished into silence, but the unshakable example of what it means to be a good man in a world that often isn't fair. For me, the betrayal left scars. I can admit that. It made me question people more deeply, made me wary of promises, made me wonder if loyalty is ever really returned in full. But it also made me pay closer attention to the things that matter, the small moments, the intangible gifts that can't be written into a will. Like the way my dad still laughs, even when his eyes are heavy with loss. The way he talks about his father with respect, not bitterness, holding on to the good even when the ending was cruel. The way he looks at me and my brother with love that is unshakable, unbending, unconditional. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine walking through that house again. I imagine touching the walls, hearing echoes of voices long gone, smelling the faint lemon scent from the backyard tree. And then I remind myself that even though I can't walk through it in reality, it still exists in me. The house, the memories, the laughter, all of it is woven into who I am. No executor, no will, no silence can erase that. What remains is complicated. Pain and love, betrayal and loyalty, anger and gratitude all tangled together. But maybe that's life. Maybe legacies are never neat. Maybe they're messy, just like families are. I know this much. My grandfather's love was real, even if his estate was taken. My dad's sacrifices were real, even if they went unrecognized. And my memories are real, even if the house belongs to strangers now. So, yes, it sucks. It will always suck. The betrayal will always sting. The silence will always echo. But what truly remains, what no one can ever steal, is the resilience passed down through generations. The ability to stand in the wreckage of broken promises and still choose love. And in the end, maybe that's worth more than a house.